The hangar bay of the Zyran Alliance warcruiser. Spear of Morning sounded like a metal colossus sighing in its sleep, hissing steam, humming plasma lines, and the occasional clatter of tools dropped by overworked technicians. Theo Patch Dalton crouched under an exorig's spine housing, muttering to himself as a sizzling noise became a popping one, then a short-lived puff of acrid smoke. "Good news, big guy," he said, patting the side of the armor like it was a dog that had just peed itself. "Your circulatory coolant's no longer trying to commit suicide." The armor, of course, did not respond. It was a Virilan assault suit, brutally elegant, built for war zones so hot they'd melt concrete. Theo had grown to admire them, in the way one might admire a tiger from inside a reinforced tank. And today's patient was just one in a long queue of damaged units sent to Theo's personal corner of the galaxy, Bay 12, which smelled of plasma scorches and old coffee grounds. The day had started normally, which should have been a warning. No loose wiring, no unexpected malfunctions, no caffeinated rodents in the filtration pipes. He'd even had time to eat breakfast, a gelatinous blue bar labeled NutriPack, tastes like toast. It didn't. Then she arrived. Commander Yalari entered with the kind of presence that made light seem to slow around her. Her armor was scorched, one gauntlet hanging useless at her side, the shoulder plating cracked like a split gemstone. She stood well over 6 feet, her long silver hair braided back in a style that whispered of blade duels and poetry. Her ears, pointed and elegantly arched, twitched in irritation as she surveyed the hangar. And then she looked directly at Theo. "You are the patchmaker?" Her voice was cool, stern, the kind that expected obedience or silence, preferably both. Theo, still halfway inside a fusion valve, looked over his shoulder. "Depends. Are you here to report a warranty violation or just throw me across the room?" Her brow twitched. "Your task is to mend this." The Virilan armor thudded to the ground beside him. Theo blinked. "Oof. You sure know how to say please." "I have no need for pleasantries. The armor must be fixed before dusk's cycle. We engage at dawn." He stood, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "Right then. Let's see which part of your murder suit hates you most." As he worked, something unexpected happened. Yalari watched him, not with disdain, as most warriors did, but with a strange clinical curiosity. She made no move to help but observed every twist of his wrench, every flick of his diagnostic wand. When he winced as a servo flared and burned his glove, she tilted her head. "You are clumsy," she said. "I'm alive, which means I'm lucky," he shot back. "Also, this thing's been modified with a subharmonic impulse relay." "Did you weld that on with your teeth?" "I improvised. I can tell." He leaned in, realigning a panel near her shoulder where the inner harness was misaligned. It took a practiced, fluid motion, flick, twist, snap, and then, without thinking, he adjusted the uppermost clasp so it wouldn't grind against the joint. There was a silence. Yalari froze. Her pupils dilated, ears flaring slightly. Theo frowned. "What?" "That part's just ornamental. If I don't realign it, "You have chosen?" she said quietly. "Huh?" The hangar, up to this point bustling with technicians and drones, went suddenly still. One by one, heads turned. A low murmur began, like distant thunder. A security officer dropped their coffee. Yalari straightened to her full height, voice clear and ringing. "Let it be known, the ritual binding mend has been fulfilled." A moment later, someone in the back clapped. Then another. Then cheering. Then, absurdly, confetti shot from a pipe near the ceiling. Theo looked around, mouth open. "What the hell is happening? Why is there confetti?" A nearby medic leaned over. "Congrats, buddy. She just declared you her mate." Theo blinked. What?" Somewhere, the ship's AI began to play a slow romantic ballad. Yalari stepped forward, towering over him, and said with solemn finality, "You are mine now." Theo took one step back. "Can I finish my shift first?" The confetti still hadn't settled when 2 Virellan guards arrived with spears that were either ceremonial or just very stylishly deadly. They flanked Theo without a word, their armor shimmering like oil on water, and escorted him through the hangar like a royal pet being shown off at a planetary fair. The AI's romantic ballad had shifted into a sweeping orchestral number now, something disturbingly similar to the finale of Titanic. Theo was still holding his wrench. He hadn't moved it from his right hand, as if setting it down would make this whole thing more real. "I think there's been a huge misunderstanding," he tried to explain to the guards. "Correct," said the one on the left in a gravelly monotone. "You misunderstood the clasp? Wait, that's a thing? Clasping armor equals marriage now?" "Not marriage," corrected the other. "Mating bond. Somehow that's worse." They marched him through corridors lined with flashing star maps and the occasional poster reminding crew to sanitize your weapon after discharging. Theo passed 3 technicians, one who gave him a thumbs up, one who saluted, and one who looked deeply, personally betrayed. Then they arrived at what appeared to be a ballroom, or possibly a repurposed cargo bay, pretending to be a ballroom. Someone had laid out banners in Viralan's script, which Theo couldn't read, but one of them had an image of 2 clasped hands surrounded by what might have been flames, or tentacles. A string quartet, made up of 2 humans, one gelatinous squid thing, and a robot with surprisingly good rhythm, played a lilting tune Theo could only describe as romantic with a hint of space drama. Commander Yalari stood at the center, resplendent in armor that had been polished in record time. Her long ears twitched again as she raised a goblet of silver liquid and said, "The bonding shall now be witnessed." Theo raised his hand. "Hi, quick question. What exactly are we bonding over? I didn't even buy you dinner." Laughter rippled through the crowd, which had grown to include 3 alien diplomats, a holographic priest, and what Theo was fairly certain was a sentient cactus in formal wear. Yalari's tone didn't waver. "The binding mend is ancient. When a warrior's armor is healed not through obligation, but instinct, when the touch comes unasked yet given with care, the bond is formed." "That's very poetic," Theo said, trying to inch backward without alerting the guards. "Where I come from, fixing someone's gear means you're nice. Not mated for life, nice." The crowd gasped at the phrase. Yalari tilted her head. "You are aware of what you've done? I thought I was just being helpful." "It was not helpful." She stepped closer. "It was sacred." The awkward tension in the room was finally cut when the holographic priest floated forward and declared in 17 languages, including one spoken entirely through ear movements, that the pact is acknowledged by the stars. Then he handed Theo a golden circlet with embedded LEDs and told him it was traditional headwear for new mates. Theo put it on upside down, mostly out of panic. "I'm not even sure I'm qualified for this kind of commitment," he muttered to himself. "Fear not, my mate," Yalari said. "You shall be trained. In combat, in etiquette, and negotiation, and perhaps dance." As if on cue, a beat dropped. Not metaphorically, a literal beat, as a Viralan percussionist dropped a sound crystal, unleashing a rhythm so powerful Theo's ribs vibrated. "Oh, stars, it's a mating reception," he whispered. He was swept onto the floor. Viralans danced in tight, dramatic circles. An octopoid couple spun in elegant tandem. And even P3EP, his maintenance droid, wobbled in on one wheel and spun like an enthusiastic blender. "Congratulations, sir," P3EP said with a digital wink. "I never thought I'd live to see you become royalty. I repair armor and miscommunicate. How does that translate to royalty?" "Cultural misfires, sir. Very explosive." Just then, a Viralan elder approached and offered Theo a ceremonial blade forged from starlight-infused crystal. It shimmered. It also hummed faintly in a way that didn't feel entirely safe. Theo sighed. "I should have just stayed in bed and eaten that blue toast bar." But he took the blade, because everyone was watching, and Yalari, standing proud beside him, looked not just victorious, but pleased. "I guess I'm in this now," he said aloud. "Indeed," Yalari replied, her voice almost amused. "You are ours." Theo tried not to stare at the blade glowing faintly in his lap as the shuttle hummed toward the council deck. Its surface pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent throb, like it was breathing, or judging him, probably both. Across from him sat Yalari, legs crossed, perfectly composed, arms resting on her thighs. Her armor had been refreshed since the wedding. She now wore formal battle garb trimmed with some kind of iridescent material that Theo suspected was either sacred fabric or repurposed space eel skin. Her long ears twitched every few moments, just enough to suggest either deep contemplation or extreme annoyance. He cleared his throat. So, just to confirm, we're going to a council session where I, an engineer who once glued his own boot to a plasma pipe, will sit next to you and try not to cause interspecies war? She nodded. Correct. Do not speak unless addressed. Do not touch anyone's horns, feathers, or emotional support slime. I wasn't planning on it, but now I have questions. You are a mate to a high-blood commander, she continued unfazed. Your presence will be interpreted as both symbol and leverage. Leverage? Theo asked. Like a bargaining chip? More like a declaration that I am not only victorious in battle, but wise in alliance. The mating bond gives me prestige. He blinked. So I'm a trophy husband now. She tilted her head. What is a trophy? A shiny object people show off while pretending they didn't find it on discount. She smirked, just slightly. It was subtle, barely there. But for Yalari, it was like a full laugh. The shuttle docked with a hiss and click, and the doors opened into a corridor bathed in amber light. The council chamber was vast, dome-shaped, and filled with floating platforms at various heights, each carrying representatives of different species. Some wore robes, some shimmered like gas. One was a cube that vibrated softly when it was thinking. Theo tried to walk with dignity, but his ceremonial robe, hastily tailored and lined with glittering sigils, kept slipping off one shoulder like a moody toga. Commander Yalari Virilan Bloodline Zarn, the announcement echoed across the dome. And her chosen mate, the voice added. Theo waved awkwardly. Hi, big fan of democracy. And breathing. Please don't vaporize me. A silence followed that might have been diplomatic, or just sheer confusion. Yalari led him to their platform, which floated gently into place. Theo tried not to look down, even though the chamber floor was clear crystal and appeared to be a galaxy-wide void. The proceedings began in a blur of formal statements, ritualistic light gestures, and phrases like, on the matter of Sector 99B's mineral sovereignty, which Theo tuned out almost immediately. Then came the part where he was formally acknowledged. A glowing orb drifted toward him. He instinctively reached for it, and it projected his face 50 feet tall into the air. Oh no, he muttered. I look like a sleep-deprived turnip. Mate of the Virilan commander, said a representative shaped like a serpentine cloud. Your kind has not participated in such a bond before. What wisdom do you bring? Theo opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Fix things. Mostly. Try not to explode. Occasionally succeed. The chamber was quiet. Then to his horror, the cube began to hum approvingly. Another delegate, the gaseous one, vibrated in agreement. Even the giant lizard creature across the way bared what might have been a smile. Yalari nodded beside him, satisfied. Your honesty is valued. Did I just pass an interstellar job interview by saying I break stuff? You said you fix things, she replied. It is the same, only with optimism. As the meeting wrapped, Theo was congratulated no fewer than 6 times and offered what might have been a congratulatory fungus biscuit. He declined, politely. Back in the corridor, he leaned against the wall, exhaling hard. Okay, that went, less catastrophically than expected. Yalari turned to him, something thoughtful in her gaze. You are unconventional. That's the nicest way anyone's ever said weird. I find it intriguing. He blinked. Wait, was that a compliment? Do not become arrogant. He grinned. Too late. I'm already planning to put wisdom of fixing stuff on my business cards. Prepare yourself, she said as they stepped back onto the shuttle. You have just become the most interesting mate in 5 systems. Oh, stars, I'm going to need more snacks. The explosion was small as explosions went. It barely singed the conference table and only vaporized 2 chairs, both unoccupied at the time. Still, the smell of charred synthwood lingered as smoke curled up to the filtration vents. Theo stood in the middle of it, holding a half-melted translator device, eyebrows singed, ceremonial robe now short enough to be considered a belt. I swear, he wheezed. It was just supposed to translate her sentence, not turn it into a plasma opera. Across the room, Yalari's eyes were sharp but not angry, more impressed than anything else, which was unsettling. Behind her, P3EP, Theo's ever-loyal maintenance droid, was already sweeping up debris with a cheerful hum and whistling the theme to an Earth sitcom no one had asked it to learn. "That is the third piece of technology you have detonated this week," Yalari said, folding her arms over her chest plate. "I'm adjusting to your language structure," Theo said, coughing slightly. "It has 32 cases for verbs." 32? That's an assault on sentence structure. "And yet, you persist." "Because," he said, straightening a little, "if I'm going to be your mate, I at least want to understand whether you're praising me or planning to gut me with a ritual blade." "That would be a ceremonial blade," she corrected. Theo stared at her. "That's not comforting." Yalari's comm pinged, and her ear twitched as she glanced at the display. "You're summoned to the lower ring. You're giving a talk." "A talk?" Theo repeated. "To who?" "The Virilan youth cohort. They wish to meet the clever mate of steel hands." "That sounds cool, but I'm just a guy with a wrench and persistent panic attacks." By the time they arrived in the lower ring, Theo had mentally drafted 12 ways to embarrass himself and narrowed them down to 3 most probable: tripping, rambling, or insulting someone's sacred pet. The youth cohort was larger than expected. Dozens of teenage Virilans in sleek training armor, all seated in orderly rows like a particularly well-armed orchestra. He was handed a microphone. It shocked him lightly, probably on purpose. "Hi," he began, voice squeaking. "I'm Theo. I fix things, occasionally blow them up. I'm, Yalari's mate." The reaction was a mix of admiration and awe. One young cadet raised her hand and asked, "Did you win her in combat?" Theo blinked. Number I fixed her shoulder clasp. They all gasped like he'd just summoned lightning. "Did you train under a master of binding arts?" another asked. "Nope. Community college. I dropped out when a vending machine caught fire." A murmur spread through the room. Clearly this was being translated as a test of courage. He sighed and leaned on the podium. "Listen, I know I'm not what you expected. I'm not a warrior or a diplomat. I can't recite star oaths or spar with 6 blades. But sometimes the universe isn't about grand battles. Sometimes it's about seeing a problem and trying to fix it, even when it explodes in your face. And if you're lucky, there's someone nearby who doesn't kill you for it." Yalari, watching from the side, raised a brow. Her ear twitched once. Approval. Theo's speech was met with thunderous applause. P3EP tried to crowd surf. He was dropped. Later, as they walked back through the echoing halls, Theo said, "I think I accidentally became a role model." Yalari nodded. "You are unconventional." "That word again." "It is increasingly useful," he sighed. "Any chance we get a quiet evening? No fireworks, no diplomacy, no sacred objects malfunctioning in my hands?" Yalari looked at him. "Unlikely," he smiled. "Figures. Well, let's at least get snacks." Behind them, the conference room's smoke finally cleared, revealing the translator device twitching, sparking, and quietly singing a love song in 6 languages. The battlefield was oddly quiet before dawn, too quiet for Theo's taste. The kind of quiet that meant someone, somewhere, was about to detonate something, and he hoped it wasn't going to be his lunch. He crouched behind a barricade of wrecked glider bikes, his hands wrist-deep in the guts of what used to be a communications repeater and now resembled a very angry coffee machine. Sparks danced around his sleeves. Somewhere in the distance, plasma rounds sizzled, lighting the horizon like heat lightning behind enemy lines. Beside him, Yalari knelt in silent vigil, her long ears motionless, her breath measured. Her armor shimmered slightly under the muted sky, freshly polished and now adorned with the sigil of her mating bond. 2 clasped hands over a nova burst. She wore it like a challenge. "Theo?" He wore a vest. "All right, genius," he muttered to himself, twisting a relay into place. "You wanted a simple life. Fix pipes, nap in 0G, maybe find a cat. Instead, you're rebuilding a battlefield antenna with repurposed food dispenser parts while your not-quite-wife plots war strategies like a goddess with laser swords. Yalari's voice was calm and close. You are muttering again. I'm stress talking. It's like normal talking, only more doomed. She tilted her head. Should I be concerned? Only if this thing starts playing opera again. With a hiss and a pulse of green light, the makeshift repeater flared to life. A holographic interface bloomed in the air, displaying troop positions and signal paths like a glowing spiderweb. Theo leaned back, triumphant and slightly singed. And that, he said, is how you hijack the enemy's relay and boost our signals using snack heater coils. Impressive, she said, for someone wearing flammable fabric. Before Theo could answer, his comm pinged. Urgently. The front line had been breached on the east flank. Command wanted suggestions. Theo blinked. They want my suggestions? You are the mate of the commander, and the only one who understands enemy tech well enough to adapt this fast. He muttered something very unheroic and pulled up the enemy map feed. It flickered but showed enough. The advancing line of hover tanks, cloaked skirmishers flanking both sides. We need a field-wide EMP burst, he said. Short range. Just enough to short their cloaking units and buy our gunners some visibility. Yalari raised a brow. Do you have such a device? Not exactly. He gestured at the junk pile behind him. But I do have a toaster, 3 shield batteries, and a strong disregard for safety protocols. 10 minutes later, Theo stood behind the barricade again, holding what could generously be called an improvised pulse emitter. It hummed ominously. I call it the Bangmaker 4000, he said. Patent pending. May void warranties within a 10-kilometer radius. Yalari reached to clasp his shoulder. You do not need to do this yourself. He looked at her, eyes wide with something that might have been bravery or might have been an utter lack of common sense. I'm the only one who knows which end is up. She gave a rare smile. Return intact, or I shall avenge you inconveniently. Theo grinned. Noted. He sprinted through smoke and static, ducking under scorched panels and skittering over half-melted terrain. The enemy tanks loomed ahead, shimmering under their adaptive cloaks. Theo dropped to one knee, planted the Bangmaker, yanked the coil, and muttered a prayer to every electrical god he knew. The pulse fired. A ripple spread like a sonic wave, silent but visible. Cloaking fields dropped like curtains. Sparks cascaded across enemy armor. For one blessed moment, the battlefield was bathed in raw light and confusion. The Virilan artillery didn't waste it. By the time Theo staggered back to the barricade, half covered in soot and somehow missing one shoe, the line had held. Soldiers cheered. Yalari was waiting. She helped him stand. You live. Barely, he gasped. The Bangmaker 4000 needs some kinks ironed out. It performed well. He wobbled slightly. Unlike my lungs. Someone handed him a glowing ration bar. He wasn't sure if it was food or a replacement battery, but he ate it anyway. As the sun finally rose behind them, 2 pale twin stars rising over the battlefield, Theo sat beside Yalari, bruised but grinning. Next time, he said, I'm building a T-machine instead. She nodded solemnly, with EMP capability. Obviously, the celebration after the battle was far louder than the battle itself. Theo found this ironic, especially while being hoisted, again, by a group of Virellan infantry, all chanting something rhythmic and vaguely ominous in a language he barely understood. He was deposited atop a table reinforced with plasma shielding, where food was already laid out in the form of glowing cubes, writhing delicacies, and a very suspicious bowl labeled Nutrient Triumph Jelly. Prep spun beside him, wearing a tiny sash labeled Honorbot. I updated your title, sir. You are now officially High Strategist of Circuit Bravery. Theo blinked. That sounds like something I made up while concussed. You did. Right after detonating the Bangmaker. Theo sighed and leaned back, rubbing soot from his face. Across the tent, Yalari stood amid a knot of commanders, speaking in clipped, firm tones. She looked every bit the war goddess she was, blood-spattered armor and long silver braids catching the ambient light. When her gaze found his, something flickered in her expression, something private, softer than war would normally allow. He gave her a mock salute with a soup spoon. She raised an eyebrow. Progress. The celebration lasted deep into the binary night, under twin moons that blinked like curious gods. Theo eventually found a quiet edge of the camp near a power conduit, humming softly in the dirt. He sat there, feet bare, vest torn, eating something that might have been grilled protein or sentient moss. He wasn't asking. Yulari approached without sound. Even in full armor, she moved like a shadow with purpose. "You disappeared," she said. "Temporarily. Victory parties make me twitchy. I grew up in a habitat dome that echoed every time someone sneezed." She sat beside him, uncharacteristically casual. For a moment, they just listened to the quiet fizz of star song, subspace static curling against the atmosphere, like distant whale song. "You were formidable today," she said at last. Theo smirked. "I was mostly terrified and moderately flammable, but thanks." Yulari tilted her head. "You improvised under pressure, used enemy tech with no prior schematics, and you risked yourself. That is not common." He toyed with a snapped bit of circuit wire. "You ever wonder what happens after? Like, after the war, after the explosions, when no one needs a brilliant, slightly panicked engineer anymore?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "I had intended to retire. After this campaign, I was going to return to the Twin Rings, teach battle theory, meditate, grow sillflowers." Theo raised a brow. "Sillflowers? They only bloom in zero gravity." "Of course they do." Silence again, but warmer this time. Less battlefield tension, more suspension, as if something else was assembling in the space between their sentences. "I don't know if I'm built for peace," Theo said. "I can't sit still. I fix things that aren't broken, and I talk too much when I'm nervous." "You have described peace precisely, only missing tea." They sat a while longer, until a runner approached. Young, breathless, eyes wide. "Commander," the youth said, "there's movement near the ridge. Not enemy, a beacon, old Virilan code." Yulari stood at once, tension knitting back into her shoulders. Theo blinked. "That sounds bad. It is ancient, forbidden. No one has used that code in generations." "Cool, so secret cult, ancient betrayal, or long-lost cousins?" Yulari didn't answer. She activated her gauntlet and read the incoming signal. The color drained slightly from her face. Theo stood beside her. "What does it say?" She looked at him, very still. "It says, 'The bound shall open the gate.'" He blinked. "Well, that's not creepy at all." She turned to him, serious now. "It's prophecy, old and mostly ignored. But your presence, our bond, it may not be coincidence." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "Well," he said finally, "guess we're not retiring just yet." Yulari's eyes narrowed with amusement and something deeper. "Not until we figure out what gate they mean, and why it wants you." Theo sighed. "If this ends with me becoming some kind of galactic key, I'm demanding hazard pay." The gate wasn't a door in the conventional sense. It was a construct floating deep in the Wraith Belt, a region of dead satellites, forgotten space wreckage, and drifting debris fields whispering through the void like ancient ghosts. And there, embedded in a derelict moon shard, stood the gate, a ring of carved obsidian alloy in starlight circuitry, pulsing with language too old for translation, too precise to be random. Theo floated before it in an EVA suit patched with duct sealant and prayer, connected to the command shuttle only by a thin tether and a deep, gnawing sense of dread. "I was promised retirement," he muttered into the comms. "You promised yourself that," Yulari replied from the shuttle's deck. "The universe declined," he sighed, adjusting the frequency modulator on his wrist. "And you're sure this thing reacts to me? You touched the clasp. You mended the armor. You bound us. The prophecy speaks of the bound mate. No one else can activate it. Great, because I definitely wanted to become a cosmic skeleton key." The gate shimmered in response, humming low like a temple breathing. As Theo drifted closer, symbols lit up along its curve, some of them resembling Virilan script, some like Terran calculus. Others looked suspiciously like doodles. He reached out, fingers brushing the cold black alloy. It was warm, and then everything changed. Not exploded, not opened, just shifted. Space folded inward, and Theo found himself not floating in the Wraith Belt, but standing on a smooth obsidian floor beneath a sky filled with memory. A projection? A dimension? He wasn't sure. Around him, golden thread lines pulsed, each one a moment, a bond, a choice, a voice, not Yalari's, not human, not even verbal, resonated in his mind. You repaired, you did not conquer, you chose without knowing. That is the rarest kind of choice. Thanks, Theo said, blinking. But, what exactly did I choose? To connect, to bind through care, not control. That is the pattern we lost. The gate wasn't a weapon or portal, it was a beacon, a signal left by a civilization so ancient it had folded into myth. A final message encoded in the language of healing, only unlockable by someone who bonded instinctively, not for war, but for repair. Theo laughed softly. I'm a galactic emergency contact. The galaxy needs one. The vision faded. He was back in the suit, tethered to the shuttle, the gate behind him now dark and silent, but peaceful. Back aboard the ship, Yalari watched him remove his helmet, eyes studying him like she still expected him to sprout antennae. What happened? She asked. Theo exhaled. It was a thank you note from the universe, for giving a damn. They returned as quiet legends. The gate, once a symbol of ancient terror, was now known as the Healer's Ring. Delegates from a dozen worlds requested access, not to exploit it, but to learn. Theo turned down a dozen medals, accepted one absurdly oversized one, because it made a great tea tray, and finally retired. Sort of. He and Yalari now lived on a research vessel in low orbit over a garden moon, where sylph-flowers bloomed in spirals through zero gravity. He fixed small things, drones, sensors, the occasional stubborn replicator. Yalari taught combat theory, built small fires from ancient tactics, and recited philosophy to students terrified of getting the ceremonial titles wrong. Some evenings they drifted in the observatory deck, sipping synth wine while P3EP played background music, and tried not to comment on how romantic the lighting was. You know, Theo said one night, I never actually agreed to be your mate. Yalari leaned back against him, one ear flicking lazily. You touched the clasp. That again? You touched me. He smiled, watching the stars flicker and twist in a sky now slightly less lonely than before. He had crossed galaxies, sparked prophecies, dodged explosions, and activated an ancient alien megastructure. But somehow the biggest miracle had been choosing to care in the smallest of moments. I guess that's how it always starts, he murmured. One fix at a time. Yalari nodded. And if it explodes, we'll fix that too.